Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Providence College podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum. I'm joined by our producer and PC videographer, Chris Judge, class of '05. As a major gift officer here at PC, I have met hundreds of fascinating members of the Providence College community, and I'm excited to share some of their stories with you. Today features Professor Vance Morgan, Professor of Philosophy at Providence College, the former Director of the Development of Western Civilization Program, and lay preacher at Episcopalian Church here in the Providence area. He started here at Providence College in 1994, and we're happy to have you here. Thank you so much, Professor Morgan.
I'm very glad to be here.
So we're catching you on the tail end of your sabbatical. Is it officially over?
It was officially over as of July 1st. I'm still sort of pretending, but yes, it is over.
So does that go from basically the last either final or essay you grade in the winter?
Technically, it goes the fiscal year. I took a full year sabbatical this time, and so it goes July 1st until the following June 30th. But in practice, yes, I would say that as soon as final grades are submitted, that's when sabbatical starts. And for me now, I'm pretty much in the middle of the summer. I'm doing what I would always be doing anyways, getting classes ready for next semester. And so it's really the energy of sabbatical is still there, but it's not very different than the middle of summer sort of energy. In the middle of the summer is when faculty do their writing, do their research, get ready for classes, and that's what I'm doing now too.
Right, so you mentioned just the energy of the sabbatical, and for you, it was a pretty extensive kind of to-do list in terms of production you wanted to do and just the amount of work that you happened to get done. Can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what your plan was for the sabbatical?
Yeah, my basic plan, which I think probably most faculty would say on sabbatical, is to get a book written and under contract. In my case, my specific plans were for now at the end of next month, it'll be for 4 years. I've been writing a blog, and in that blog, over those almost 4 years, or by the beginning of sabbatical, over 3 years, I had almost 300,000 words worth of stuff written. And my plan was to take that material, pull some stuff out of it, reorganize it, write some new stuff, and produce a hard copy book, which ended up happening. And it's under contract now, so hopefully it'll be out early next year.
And your blog is Freelance Christianity?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if people want to look it up, what's the web address?
It's freelancechristianity.com, all one word.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you touch on a lot of topics within your blog.
Yeah. It ranges from probably the heart of it, and this is where the book came from, is working on the relationship of the mind and faith, and the intellect and faith, which is, of course, something that we're very interested in here at this college in particular. But for me, it's been something I've been working on, struggling with, asking about my whole life. My father was a itinerant Baptist minister, and so I was a preacher's kid, and I grew up in a very specific conservative version of Protestantism. But I also grew up in a family that was very interested in the intellectual life, and a love of books, which really caught on very early for me. And so how to fit all that stuff together has been of importance to me from the very beginning, as far back as I can remember. And then when I ended up going into higher education and becoming a professor and getting my graduate degree in philosophy, of course, that just really shaped it even further. But in the blog, what I try to do is not do it in an academic sort of way, but rather do it in a way that would be attractive to anybody who is interested in issues of how do human beings relate to what's greater than us. How does the mind relate to that? How do doubt and certainty work into those sorts of things? So that's really the heart of my blog. But I also write about teaching. I write about crazy stuff. I write about sports. I'm a sports fanatic. So I write about lots of different things. But I try to do 2 new ones and 1 repeat per week. And blog posts usually are roughly about 1,200 to 1,500 words each.
So how long does it take you from the point of thinking of the topic to completing the post?
That really depends. I have a folder on my computer, on my tablet, which just simply says unfinished posts, and I'll have anywhere from 15 to 30 things in there at times. And because I'll just put down an idea and let it sit. But sometimes the idea will be something that'll develop really quickly. If I actually go from beginning to end in one sitting, which doesn't happen that often, but does every once in a while, it can be, no more than 90 minutes to 2 hours from when I started writing until I have it online with the pictures and everything else. But more often than not, I try to stay a week or two ahead. And more often than not, I would say from beginning to when it's ready to go onto the blog itself, probably it'll be about 10 days worth of work, and maybe I'll put together maybe 3-4 hours worth.
Now, how has having the blog impacted your professional life?
It's had a really big impact because it's given me an outlet for for things I've been doing in the classroom for years. I tell people frequently that what I'm doing, both the blog and also the book that has emerged from it, is something that academics only get to do once they have tenure and once they're a full professor, because it's not the kind of writing that gets published in academic journals. It's not the kind of writing that our Committee on Academic Research and Tenure is going to be counting very highly toward moving up the scale. It's not particularly academic, but once you've walked through those various sorts of things that academics have to go through, that professors have to go through, once you've completed most of the hurdles, finally you get to a point where you're able to just sort of find your own voice. And I've been working on that in the classroom and working with students on how does philosophy and the rest of our lives work together, really ever since I've been a professor. But this is the first time I've ever been able to really begin to develop that in writing. So it's made a huge difference. And also it's more closely related to what I teach than anything I've ever written. So that really is very helpful too. They feed off of each other.
Right. Now, the topics you're covering are obviously very broad-based. So for you specifically, as you specialize within philosophy and different ways of thinking, what areas are you more, say, drawn to, or do you find yourself spending most of your time on?
I consider my real systematic focus in philosophy to be ethics. And that's my favorite thing to teach. I'm getting to teach 2 sections of general ethics in the fall, and it'll be the first time I've taught general ethics in either 5 or 6 years. Because of running DWC, I didn't get to teach very many philosophy courses during those 4 years. So I'm really looking forward to that. For me, ethics is the place where philosophy and where the rubber really meets the road, where philosophy and real life immediately intersect. And so I like to introduce students, anybody, to philosophy through ethics, because we're dealing with issues, we're dealing with questions, and everybody, if they step back or just lean back a little bit and think about it, they've thought about or they've lived through the issues that we work on in ethics all the time. It's just that philosophy is asking us to do it in a more systematic and careful way.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the texts that they would read in those classes in terms of beginning ethics class, or somebody, if they say they graduated 20 years ago, they're not going to be taking a class at PC this fall, some just things that you would have them read if they were interested in such a topic?
My ethics classes this coming semester, it's an entirely new syllabus, something I've never done before. It's going to be entirely contemporary sorts of stuff. There's and it probably is because I'm writing in blog style myself now, but the New York Times has a blog called The Stone, which is a philosophy blog sort of thing that philosophers from all over the world have been contributing to for about the last 5 or 6 years, and it's always on very, very contemporary topics. It's on, usually the essays are no more than 2,000-3,000 words, so they're relatively bite-sized sorts of readings. And I like to introduce people to ethics by throwing them into the middle of moral issues, ethical conflict, that sort of thing. Rather than doing the theory first, I rather like to throw them into the middle of issues like, what do you do, for instance, one of these essays is by a person who considered himself to be a pretty typical progressive liberal, but for various sorts of reasons had to take he was a freelance writer, but then had to get a more regular type of salary. So he took a job as a speechwriter for a big firm on Wall Street, and found himself regularly writing speeches, trying to sell things, trying to sell a frame of mind and a worldview that he just didn't believe in. Mm-hmm. So how do you sort those sorts of things out? And that's what I like to do to begin with, and try to get students to understand why we need to think systematically, and why people might want to build a theoretical framework around ethical issues. Is just because human life is very, very complicated. It's very interesting, but it's very complicated and can be very difficult. And philosophy is just trying to give us a hand in sorting it out, not oversimplifying it, but just trying to give us some idea of how to sort these things through carefully.
Right. Obviously, everyone knows of philosophy as a very historically grounded practice and field of study, mm-hmm. but it can be used in any time period by anybody and can be used for very contemporary issues.
Right.
With that in mind, very recently, Ryan Holiday has a couple bestsellers that have come out, have been very popular, that have dealt with Stoicism. Ego is the Enemy recently came out, and a couple of years ago, The Obstacle is the Way also came out. And they're both very popular books, and he's a very popular blogger and author. Do you see a rise in popularity for these topics when you have this sort of kind of pop culture boom around them, or is it just one of those things where it kind of is an evergreen type topic?
No, I think that there's more and more interest in thinking carefully about these things, and I think intelligent people want to make connections to traditional ways of thinking and be convinced that they really are applicable to our world. Stoicism is certainly one of them. If I were to advise anybody as to where to look in the history of philosophy for the frameworks for thinking about ethics that really are very applicable to now, Stoicism would be one, and Aristotle would be the other. Aristotle's virtue ethics would be the other. When I was DWC director, at least once and usually twice per semester, I was asked on a Saturday to come in, whether it was to alums or whether it was to prospective parents, students and their parents, to give a, quote, mock DWC lecture. And my go-to lecture was always an introduction to Stoicism, because the basics of Stoicism are very understandable. Especially, well, I often say that Stoicism is an ethical framework for grown-ups. I find it doesn't sell that well with 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but when you've been run over by life a few times and you realize how much of what we experience is not within our control, it becomes more and more attractive. Parents really like the idea of Stoicism. What I usually do at the beginning of that lecture, well, the title of the lecture is Death is Nothing Terrible, an Introduction to Stoicism. But I just asked, I will draw this on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard, just draw a line down through, and I say, okay, on the left-hand side, we will put all the things that are within our control on a daily basis. And then on the right-hand side, we'll put down all the things that are not within our control, and we'll start on that side. And I just ask them to brainstorm and just shout out things that are not within our control. And it goes, almost always people will immediately say the weather, and they'll say taxes, and they'll say any number of things, but usually we start getting to relationships, to other people, to death, to health, and it turns out that column gets really, really full very, very fast. Mm-hmm. And so after 5-10 minutes of that, I just say, well, it doesn't appear that there's much of anything left. And so what could possibly be left that we could put in this left-hand column that is within our control? And pretty quickly, people realize that what is within our control is how we will respond to what has happened to us, is that we can't control very much of what happens to us, but we are fully in control of how we process it and how we respond to it. And that's really the basics of Stoicism. at the beginning of his little, what I think is the best text in Stoicism, Epictetus's book, just simply called The Manual, the Enchiridion, he does his version of that same exercise. He just simply says some things are within our control and some things are not, and the secret to a peaceful and happy life is learning which is which. And his advice is, because I ask the people in the classroom, how much time or how much energy percentage-wise on a daily basis do we put into these right-hand column things? Mm-hmm. And usually they say 85, 90%. And the Stoics' advice is stop doing that. Right. And put your energies, which are limited for a human being, put your energies into the things that you can control.
And that's, I think, intellectually isn't an argument that'd be hard to kind of contradict or to go against. However, it seems, at least in my own case, putting into practice is a completely different animal.
This is very, very contrary to the American, the stereotypical American can-do, lift yourself up by your own bootstraps sort of thing. And I mean, in the middle of a political season, that's a great, great topic to be talking about, is to what extent are we capable of creating ourselves and writing our own story. And the Stoics aren't saying that we're entirely powerless, but they're asking us to start with recognizing where our power truly lies, rather than manipulating things out there. For instance, the things in the right-hand column include your family, your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your social status you were born into, the part of the world you were born into. All of those things shape who you are, and you didn't choose any of them. I often ask students, how many of you think you would be significantly different person if you had been born in rural Tibet rather than where you were born? Mm-hmm. And they all raise their hand, and it's because we know that those things that surround us when we first show up on planet Earth are things that shape us and define us in ways that we don't even know, and yet we didn't choose any of them. So we really are not capable of creating ourselves from scratch. We have to identify what we are, who we are, and then within those parameters we can make some differences.
So over time, through your study of this topic and just generally wrestling with these issues, through your blog posts and just in terms of your intellectual curiosity, have you feel like you've grown or improved in your ability to handle your reactions to different stimuli, or if you're in a situation where you may not agree with what's happening, your ability to kind of dissociate yourself from that and just kind of handle what you can handle? Or is it just a continual struggle?
Well, it's always a work in progress, for sure. I would guess that I'm better at it than I used to be. But yes, it's always a continuing struggle. It's interesting that you asked that, because it makes me think of my previous sabbatical, 7 years ago, which is really, it was during that sabbatical when I was away for a semester that I really began to encounter some changes internally that really ultimately were what produced the blog, produced the different way of teaching, writing, all those sorts of things. I was at an ecumenical institute. I was a resident scholar at an ecumenical institute in a small Benedictine college in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, for 4 years, in the middle of the winter too, which is not a really wise place to go from January through May. But one of the things that I did while I was there is there's a very large Benedictine abbey there, and I just chose to participate with the monks in daily noon prayer, which amounts to just reading 3 psalms, saying a few prayers, sitting a lot in silence, and leaving. Okay. And I just did it as a regular practice. I'd never done something like that before, and it turned out to be really transformative, because what it helped me do is clear away an awful lot of the noise that all of us live with. And this is one of the wonderful things about sabbatical. Every human being should have sabbatical available to them. It's because it gives you the opportunity just to not to step back and do nothing, but to step back and do things differently, at least. And I found the just simply being there, and the silence in particular, and just an opportunity to more or less just be and try and start to learn how to quiet my mind down. because I've been a person who's lived out of my head my whole life, really made a huge difference. So much so that I ended up spending doing this 3 times a week, 3 times a day. I'm sorry, with morning and noon and evening prayer, but just because I found something different going on inside of me. And for me, it was very much related to my faith, but I don't think that it has to be. Stoicism is not a religion, but Stoicism is about finding the space inside of you that is, the Stoic, one of their bumper sticker type of statements is they are seeking from inner tranquility to produce outer effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And I think that most of us in our world, especially in our culture, are all about outer effectiveness first, the right-hand column stuff. And what this sabbatical experience helped me do is to find the space of inner tranquility that we all carry with us, but most of us never find because we don't take the time or don't have the time to find it. And I'm glad that sabbatical happened before I became DWC director, because it really, really was important to me to be able to quickly step back and find a place when stuff just, like 17,000 different things at once was going on when I was directing that big program. To be able to quickly find a space of quietness and a certain amount of tranquility that I could step into without, because I learned how to do that on sabbatical. So that other people do this sort of thing through meditation, and there are all sorts of different ways to do it. But that's what the Stoics are about: is that we carry the key to happiness and contentment inside of us, but most of us never take the time to find it.
Right. And I remember reading some of your blog posts on freelance Christianity, and I thought some of the more humorous ones, and I thought, frankly, a lot of them were very funny, especially the pictures and memes that you have along with them, were some of the ones where you described what it was like to run the DWC program, or your interactions with other faculty members from a kind of a managerial sense, and just how you navigated that process. And I thought they were always pretty funny posts. With that in mind, were there any posts that you feel like resonated most with you, especially now that you've gone back and looked at them in preparation for your book, that you'd recommend anyone to take a look at?
After I keep a running table of contents. To be honest with you, I did not expect this project to last this long. I told my wife, because I really resisted doing the blog for a while, knowing that I was beginning to write differently and I was beginning to collect essays and I didn't know what to do with them. And a couple of people, an editor of a very large magazine, and somebody else who I really trust who knows about editing and publishing, told me, in this day and age, the type of thing you're doing, there is an audience for it, but you will need to prove that there's an audience for it. And I would, usually the advice is start a blog and be able to show that you have a readership and the people are looking at this. And I just didn't want to do it. But finally, it was the last day of August 4 years ago. I finally decided just to give it a shot. And I told my wife, this is something that I'll just do as long as I'm enjoying it, but as soon as it becomes just another damn thing I have to do, I'm not going to do it anymore. But it not only never became that, it really has become extraordinarily important to me. I would advise. I've mentioned the table of contents because I was looking at it. I just put up the one that's going up on Friday. Put it up yesterday. And updated the table of contents, and as of now, the one on Friday is going to be number 640 something.
Oh, wow.
And so what I would suggest is that people just go on the blog, and on the right-hand column halfway down, there is a word cloud because I tag it, any blog post that I do it through WordPress, and they make it very easy to tag keywords, to tag all sorts of themes. And that'll give you the 40 most common themes in the blog, which goes anywhere from, you'll see philosophy, you'll see teaching, you'll see literature. You'll also see a lot of faith-related topics. You'll see my wife's name, my wife's, and the names, the size of the letters tells how often.
Right.
And so my wife is more popular than Jesus, but not as popular as philosophy right now. But just take a look there and just click on them, because if you click on that, and it will give you all the blog posts that had anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. And if people are interested in the original idea of relationship between faith and the intellect, the subtitle, by the way, of the blog, the blog is, as you say, Freelance Christianity, and the subtitle is Philosophy, Faith, and the Real World. And so if you're kind of allergic to religious ideas and such, but you're just wanting to get a sense of that, go on there and click on something like hope or peace or truth or something like that. Any number of things might bring you to it. And then you're also going to see Providence College, you're going to see the Friars on there and stuff like that too. Mm-hmm. So you could go on there, and I would just invite people to go on there, and I appreciate your mentioning it, because I always can use the numbers. Just look around, and there's a place that you can sign up for it if you're interested. And but just, if the idea of how do you take what you claim to believe and consider to be important and actually try to make it real on a daily basis, if that's of interest to you, I think people would find some interesting stuff there.
And you're on Twitter as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what's your handle?
That is Thorsen Chair, which doesn't make a lot of sense. THORSENCHAIR. Thorsen is my mother's maiden name, and I put those two things together when I became chair of the philosophy department back in the middle, 2004. Did that for 4 years. That became, I put those two things together, and that more or less became my my email address, and so I've just sort of saved it. It was an easy one to remember.
All right, and one more time, what's the web address for the blog post?
It's www.freelancechristianity.com.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Morgan.
You're welcome. I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you.
Hey, our pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Providence College podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with members of the Friar family. Also, please rate and review the show. This is the centennial year here at Providence College. We hope you can make it back to campus and attend one of the numerous events we're having regionally and nationally. You can learn more about the centennial on our website, which is providence.edu/centennial. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Chittim, that's MattChittim, and Providence College at Providence COL. If you have any suggestions for the show or comments, please email us at podcast@providence.edu. Thanks for listening, and go Friars!